Coming live from the Tivoli Met Radio studio here on the Auraria campus, this is All Sports with Gerardo. Thank you for listening to All Sports through Met Radio on mymetmedia.com, live every Thursday from 3:30 to 5 p.m. This is your host, Gerardo, and all I talk is sports. On the show today, I am going to talk about NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, NHL hockey, college football, and soccer. So before I start the show, I hope you all had a great week. To start off with Major League Baseball, Joe Madden will become the next manager of the Angels. This past week, after the Nationals sweep the Cardinals in the National League Championship Series, the Nationals are World Series bound. They landed up sweeping the Cardinals in the National League Championship Series, and this is the first time in Nationals history the Nationals won the National League pennant, and they will be playing in their first World Series this year. Howie Kendrick was named National League Championship Series MVP. Howie Kendrick was one of the main reasons why the Nationals are headed to the World Series. He's had a great postseason so far, and he's definitely been one of the key players in key moments when the Nationals need to win games. And they've been able to win games because of Howie Kendrick. So congrats to him on winning that award, and congrats to the Nationals on reaching their first World Series in franchise history. The Nationals were able to win Game 4 in Washington, D.C., and they were able to sweep the Cardinals at Nationals Park. So after that final out of Game 4 of the National League Championship Series, everybody was excited, everybody was celebrating, and everybody was partying like it was 1933 in Washington, D.C. Now, Washington has had a lot of history in the past. They used to be the Washington Senators. They used to be the Montreal Expos when they relocated from Washington up to Montreal. And then in 2005, the Montreal Expos were no longer a team, and the team landed up relocating back to Washington, D.C., and they became the Washington Nationals. Now, the Nationals have only been around since 2005, but the organization and the franchise has been around longer than that because they've been a different team, they've had a different name, and they've played in a different city. They used to be the Montreal Expos, but now they're the Washington Nationals. Now, with the team being the Washington Nationals, they don't have a lot of history since they've only been around since 2005. Since 2012, and even before that, but especially in the last few years, the Washington Nationals have had a lot of history in the postseason. Now, they haven't been on the good side, except for this season. In winner-take-all games, or in key games that the Nationals needed to win if they wanted to advance to the next round of the postseason, they were not able to win those games. Also, the Nationals used to have Bryce Harper from 2012 to 2018. As we all know, this past offseason, Bryce Harper became a free agent. He landed up chasing the money, even though the Nationals were offering him a decent contract and decent amount of money. But Bryce Harper turned that down, and he landed up signing that huge contract with the Phillies right before the 2019 season began. But if you look at the Nationals, if you looked at this team at the beginning of the season, especially in May, who would have thought this team would have even made it into the playoffs? If you would have seen the record that the Nationals had in May, you would have thought there's no chance they even make it into the playoffs. They're not even going to have a great season. They're not going to win a lot of games. They don't have Bryce Harper anymore since he's on the Phillies. no one would have thought that the Nationals would have made it into the playoffs. They were definitely a surprise team. And after the All-Star break, but especially in the last 2 months of the regular season, the Nationals started playing some great baseball. And they were playing the type of baseball that they were capable of. Even though the Nationals couldn't re-sign Bryce Harper and he chose the Phillies, the Nationals were able to spend that money they would have used on Bryce Harper, and they were able to go out in free agency and acquire different players, which included starting pitcher Patrick Corbin, and they also made some other moves since they had the money. Even before that, the Nationals were not a bad team. They still had a decent starting lineup. They still had those great starting pitchers, which included Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg, and they even had a decent bullpen. It's just, were they capable of being better or playing better baseball than their other divisional rivals in the National League East? No one knew if that was going to happen or if they were capable of playing great baseball. Even though they didn't show it at the beginning of the regular season, and they didn't show what they were capable of until the end of the regular season, there's a reason why the Nationals are in the World Series. When the Nationals needed to play their best baseball, they did. They were able to win games, and all their great players played great, no matter if they were in the starting lineup, the starting pitchers, or the relievers in the bullpen. They all stepped up and played great. It didn't matter if they were a big name, a well-known player, the franchise player, or someone coming off the bench. It didn't matter who it was. Everybody on the Nationals was able to step up and play some great baseball. And that is why they are in the World Series. But they definitely surprised a lot of people. Because if you would have made predictions for the Nationals at the beginning of the season, or even early in the season, no one would have picked them to even make it into the playoffs. And their World Series odds would have been slim. But they definitely surprised Major League Baseball. And that is why they are in the World Series. Believe it or not, after the Nationals played some great baseball in the last 2 months of the regular season, they were able to get into the playoffs as a wild card team. They were able to win the wild card game against the Brewers at Nationals Park. They were able to take the Dodgers all the way to Game 5 and play Game 5 at Dodger Stadium and upset the Dodgers, which was one of the best teams in the National League and in baseball. In Game 5 of the National League Division Series, the Nationals were able to go to Dodger Stadium, upset the Dodgers. The Dodgers was one of the best teams in the National League and in baseball. They were able to upset them in extra innings after the game went into extra innings, since it was tied. And in the top of the 10th inning, with bases loaded, Howie Kendrick was able to hit that grand slam, which landed up winning the game for the Nationals. They advanced to the National League Championship Series. They went against the Cardinals, and they were able to sweep the Cardinals. In Game 1, the Nationals were able to win the game 2-0. In Game 2, the Nationals were able to win the game 3-1. In Game 3, the Nationals were able to win the game 8-1. And to put the icing on the cake, in Game 4, the Nationals were able to win the game 7-4. After winning that game at Nationals Park, they advanced into the World Series, and the Washington Nationals will be playing in the World Series this year. Now, it didn't matter if the Nationals were playing in St. Louis or in Washington, D.C. They were able to win games, they were able to score runs, and they were able to play some great baseball. But especially in Washington, D.C., were they able to score a lot of runs. And after scoring all those runs in the first inning of Game 4, that just sealed the National League Championship Series, and there was no doubt that the Nationals were going to win Game 4 in Washington, D.C. and make their way to this year's World Series. So congrats to the Nationals on winning the National League after sweeping the Cardinals in the National League Championship Series. Now we're going to have to wait and see what happens and see who the Nationals are going to go against in this year's World Series. It's either going to be the Astros or the Yankees. We're going to have to wait and see. Now looking at the American League Championship Series between the Astros and the Yankees, this is definitely an interesting series so far. In Game 1, the Yankees were able to win the game 7-0. In Game 2, the Astros were able to win the game 3-2 after Carlos Correa walked off with a walk-off home run in Game 2. In Game 3, the Astros were able to win the game 4-1. Currently, the Astros lead the series 2-1. And just like 2 years ago, the Astros-Yankees series went all the way to Game 7. That was a great series 2 years ago. There's no doubt this year's going to be a great series, and it could possibly go all the way to Game 7. Now, whoever pitches better in the American League Championship Series, I would expect this team to make their way to this year's World Series. And we're just going to have to wait and see what happens in the American League Championship Series. But it should definitely be an interesting series. Now for the Nationals, one of the reasons why they are in the World Series is because of their pitching. They have pitched really great in the postseason, especially in the National League Championship Series after they were able to sweep the Cardinals. So whoever the Nationals go against in this year's World Series, if they pitch really great, they're going to have a chance at winning the World Series this year. And if they win the World Series, this will be their first World Series championship. But whatever team the Nationals go against in this year's World Series, and whatever team lands up pitching better, especially among their starting pitchers, that will be the team that wins this year's World Series. So congrats to the Nationals on making their first appearance in this year's World Series. Since they sweep the Cardinals, they're going to be sitting around and waiting for the next few days. They're just going to have to wait and see if they're going against the Astros or the Yankees. Hopefully it doesn't hurt them since they're going to be sitting around for the next few days. And hopefully it doesn't cool them off, because in Major League Baseball and in other sports, when a team sits around for a few days and has to wait and see who their opponent's going to be, especially in the playoffs, it can cool them off. And when it's time for them to play, they don't play their best game, and they don't play the way they were up until the time they were resting for a couple days. So hopefully this doesn't affect the Nationals, since they're going to be sitting around and waiting for the next few days. Now looking at the Nationals, now that they're in the World Series, who knows if Bryce Harper was watching the Nationals during the postseason, or even if he watched the National League Championship Series and saw that the Nationals are making their way to the World Series. Who knows if the Nationals would have made it to the World Series if Bryce Harper was on the team. But if you remember, if you go back to spring training when Bryce Harper got signed to the Phillies, when he had his press conference, he landed up stating that he wants to bring a World Series title back to DC. He should have stated, we want to bring a World Series back to Philadelphia. But instead he stated, we want to bring a World Series back to DC. So, to crack this joke out, if you go back to that Bryce Harper press conference back in spring training when he was introduced to the Phillies, even Bryce Harper called that the Nationals would be going to the World Series. And who knows, the Nationals may be bringing back a World Series title to DC. We're going to have to wait and see. But with Bryce Harper now being on the Phillies and the Phillies not making it into the playoffs, I bet Bryce Harper's feeling, why did I leave Washington, D.C. and go to Philadelphia? If I didn't leave, I could possibly be playing in the World Series right now and have a chance at winning the World Series. Who knows if it would have been different if Bryce Harper was still on the team. But even when Bryce Harper was on the Nationals, Bryce Harper wasn't the best player on the Nationals. If you look at the last 6 years when Bryce Harper was on the team, there was only one season Bryce Harper was the best player on the team. Because the Nationals have a lot of great players. It doesn't mean Bryce Harper isn't a great player. The Nationals have Bryce Harper, Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg, Ryan Zimmerman. They've had a lot of great players over the course of the last 6 years when Bryce Harper was on the team. So there's no doubt that Bryce Harper and some of these players I just mentioned were some of the best players on the team. But with the Nationals surprising everybody in Major League Baseball, and now that they're in the World Series, we're going to have to wait and see if they can win the World Series. But the National League East was very interesting this year, and it's going to be very interesting going into next season and going into the future. Except for the Marlins, every other team in the National League East, which includes the Nationals, the Phillies, the Braves, and the Mets, but especially the Nationals, Phillies, and Braves, they're all going to have a chance at winning the National League East. And even if they don't win the National League East, but they're contending for a playoff spot, they're all going to have a chance at getting into the playoffs. So the National League East is definitely going to be an interesting division going into the future. But I do want to say congrats to the Nationals on sweeping the Cardinals in the National League Championship Series and making their way to the World Series. It will be their first World Series appearance, and we're going to have to wait and see if the Nationals win the World Series. But looking at the American League Championship Series, currently the Astros are leading this series 2-1, and we're going to have to wait and see what happens here. But it's definitely going to be very interesting to see what team the Nationals play in this year's World Series and what team wins the World Series. Right now I'm going to take a commercial break. When I come back, I will talk about the NFL. Welcome back to All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to NFL football. Lamar Jackson is the first player in the Super Bowl era with over 200 passing yards and over 150 rushing yards in a regular season game. During the Ravens-Bengals game, Lamar Jackson had 236 passing yards and 152 rushing yards. After playing 7 years in the NFL, former Broncos quarterback Brock Osweiler announced he's retiring from the NFL. Now looking at Brock Osweiler, he was definitely one of the key factors as to why the Broncos won Super Bowl 50. When Peyton Manning had to sit out a few games during the 2015 season, when the Broncos won Super Bowl 50 that season, Brock Osweiler had to replace Peyton Manning. And that was a big step as to why the Broncos were able to win Super Bowl 50. Brock Osweiler had some big shoes to fill, especially since he was the backup to Peyton Manning. And to fill the shoes of what Peyton Manning can do and what Peyton Manning is capable of, that was a huge challenge to Brock Osweiler. But he was ready to take on that challenge. And when Peyton Manning had to sit out a few games, Brock Osweiler had to start 7 games for Peyton Manning. And during those 7 games, Brock Osweiler was able to go 5-2. And once Peyton Manning was ready to go and Brock Osweiler started struggling in the last game of the 2015 regular season, Peyton Manning replaced Brock Osweiler, and Peyton Manning carried the Broncos into the playoffs. He was able to win the games in the playoffs, and he took the Broncos all the way to Super Bowl 50. And they landed up beating the Panthers in Super Bowl 50, 24-10. But Brock Osweiler was a huge part of the 2015 Broncos team, and Brock Osweiler was a huge part as to why the Broncos were able to win games back in 2015. And the Broncos were still able to get into the playoffs, and they were able to get to the Super Bowl and win Super Bowl 50. So with everything Brock Osweiler did for the Broncos in the 2015 season, which led the Broncos to winning Super Bowl 50, there's no doubt that Brock Osweiler had a great career with the Broncos, especially that season. But unfortunately, after winning Super Bowl 50, Brock Osweiler became a free agent, even though the Broncos were offering a decent contract to Brock Osweiler. He landed up chasing the money, which any player in the NFL or in other leagues would do after having a breakout season and after having a great season with their previous team or having a few great seasons with their previous team. They land up chasing the money, which Brock Osweiler did, which I can't blame him for doing that. And he landed up signing a 4-year contract with the Houston Texans. Now, Brock Osweiler didn't last that long with the Texans. He only landed up lasting 1 season with the Texans before he made a return back to the Broncos when they were switching between quarterbacks in the last 2 seasons. But his second time with the Broncos didn't last that long. After the Broncos released Brock Osweiler, after he made his return back to the Broncos, the Dolphins landed up signing Brock Osweiler as a backup quarterback, but that didn't last that long either. And in the last few days, Brock Osweiler announced he's retiring from the NFL. Now, if Brock Osweiler didn't chase the money and sign a contract with the Texans, there's no doubt that Brock Osweiler would have been our starting quarterback and possibly our franchise quarterback after having the type of season he had back in 2015. After the Broncos won Super Bowl 50, Peyton Manning announced he was going to retire from the NFL. So with the Broncos knowing that Peyton Manning was going to retire, they were expecting Brock Osweiler to take over for Peyton Manning and be the starting quarterback, but unfortunately that didn't happen, and Brock Osweiler landed up chasing the money, testing free agency, and signing with the Texans. Even though all that took place, Brock Osweiler was definitely a huge factor as to why the Broncos won Super Bowl 50 and why the Broncos were able to have a great season back in 2015. So I just want to say thank you to Brock Osweiler for everything he did, especially back in 2015, since we were able to have a great season. We got to Super Bowl 50 and we won Super Bowl 50. So congrats to Brock Osweiler on having a great career, especially with the Broncos, and enjoy retirement. With the NFL trade deadline approaching towards the end of October, we got teams making trades and making moves. And I would expect in the next few days and in the next 2 weeks before the end of the trade deadline that other teams make some moves and trade some players. We have already seen some great players and even some franchise players get traded. So right now I'm going to update you with all the NFL trades that have happened up until now. This is only the beginning of all the trades that have happened so far, and the NFL trade deadline is around the corner in the next few weeks. The Jaguars traded quarterback Jalen Ramsey to the Rams in exchange for 2 first-round picks in 2020 and in 2021, and they will get a 2021 fourth-round pick. The Ravens traded for cornerback Marcus Peters from the Rams in exchange for linebacker Kenny Young. So after the Ravens traded for cornerback Marcus Peters, the Rams needed a cornerback, especially a good one, since Marcus Peters is one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL, and they were able to trade for cornerback Jalen Ramsey from the Jaguars. In the last few weeks, cornerback Jalen Ramsey has been wanting to be traded from the Jaguars. In the last few weeks, the Jaguars were stating and announcing that they were not going to trade Jalen Ramsey, even though Jalen Ramsey kept stating he wanted to be traded and he was going to be traded. Even though the Jaguars kept saying they weren't going to trade him, but Jalen Ramsey kept saying he wanted to be traded. In the last few days, the Jaguars landed up trading Jalen Ramsey, and he was traded to the Rams. The Eagles released linebacker Zach Brown after he called out his former teammate Kirk Cousins before the Eagles-Vikings game by stating Kirk Cousins is probably the weakest part of the Vikings offense. Now, Kirk Cousins was able to get the last laugh. During the Eagles-Vikings game, Kirk Cousins threw for 333 yards. He had 4 touchdowns, and the Vikings beat the Eagles 38-20. So there's no doubt that Kirk Cousins got the last laugh. Even though Kirk Cousins sometimes doesn't have great games, there's no doubt that Kirk Cousins is still a great quarterback. Even though he's not very consistent, but he can still have some great games, just like he did against the Vikings after his former teammate Zach Brown called him out. But Kirk Cousins was able to prove to Zach Brown and to the Eagles, but especially to the rest of the NFL, what he is capable of. And he showed that he's still a great quarterback in the NFL. Even though he's not consistent, I still like Kirk Cousins because he is a great quarterback, even though he is not an elite quarterback. The Broncos beat the Titans 16-0 on Sunday, October 13th in Denver. So the Broncos were able to win their second straight game. Now looking at the Broncos-Titans game, the Broncos played great on offense. They didn't score a lot of points. They were able to score enough points to beat the Titans. Now looking at the Broncos defense, they were solid and they played some great defense. They were able to get to Marcus Mariota. Marcus Mariota didn't even have a great game at the quarterback position. After Marcus Mariota didn't play that great, the Titans landed up benching Marcus Mariota in the second half, and they landed up bringing Ryan Tannehill into the game. After Marcus Mariota didn't have a great game against the Broncos and he got benched, the Titans did announce after they brought in Ryan Tannehill into the Broncos game that Ryan Tannehill will be their starting quarterback for their next game. But the Broncos defense played very great. They were able to get to Marcus Mariota. They stopped Derrick Henry from having a big game. And they were just able to stop that Titans offense, and they didn't let them score any points. That is how the Broncos were able to beat the Titans. Now, if you didn't get to watch this game, or you didn't get to go to Mile High Stadium and watch this game in person, before the Broncos-Titans game, the Broncos had some of their best players to ever play for the Broncos in attendance. The Broncos had a lot of alumni in attendance, which included Hall of Fame quarterback John Elway, Peyton Manning, Hall of Famer Shannon Sharpe, Hall of Famer Floyd Little, Hall of Famer Gary Zimmerman, Hall of Famer Champ Bailey, and they had a lot of other great Broncos alumni in attendance that are also in the Broncos Ring of Fame. Since the Broncos and their fans elected the Broncos top 100 players, a lot of the players that were ranked in the Broncos top 100, which were former players for the Broncos and now alumni, they were in attendance for this Broncos-Titans game. And before the game, they introduced the Broncos top 100 players and all the players that were in attendance for this game. And they introduced all these players one by one coming out of the Broncos tunnel before the game. Now, the main reason as to why the Broncos had their Hall of Famers and their Ring of Famers, but especially their alumni in attendance, was because at halftime the Broncos honored Hall of Famer Champ Bailey and Hall of Famer Pat Bowlen. During halftime, the Broncos honored Hall of Fame cornerback Champ Bailey by adding him to the Broncos Ring of Fame. And they also honored their Hall of Fame owner, Pat Bowlen, at halftime by adding his Hall of Fame symbol next to his name in the Broncos Ring of Fame, since Pat Bowlen was already in the Broncos Ring of Fame. But now the Broncos added Champ Bailey to their Ring of Fame, and they also added that Hall of Fame symbol to Pat Bowlen's name in the Ring of Fame. So at halftime, the Broncos had a Hall of Fame ceremony honoring Hall of Fame cornerback Champ Bailey and their Hall of Fame owner, Pat Bowlen. There's no doubt that Broncos cornerback Champ Bailey is one of the best cornerbacks to ever play for the Broncos and in the NFL, and there's no doubt that Broncos owner Pat Bowlen is one of the best owners in the NFL, but especially for the Broncos. So I want to say congrats to Hall of Fame cornerback Champ Bailey and Broncos owner Pat Bowlen on being inducted into the Hall of Fame this year and being inducted into the Broncos Ring of Fame. There's no doubt that Champ Bailey is one of the best cornerbacks for the Broncos, and there's no doubt that Pat Bowlen was one of the best owners for the Broncos. So it was great that the Broncos had this ceremony to honor Champ Bailey and Pat Bowlen for getting into the NFL Hall of Fame and for honoring everything they did throughout their career and for putting them into the Broncos Ring of Fame. So that was definitely the main highlight of the Broncos-Titans game, since Broncos owner Pat Bowlen and cornerback Champ Bailey were honored at halftime for being inducted into the Hall of Fame and into the Broncos Ring of Fame. The Broncos' next game is against the Chiefs in Denver on Thursday, October 17th. So here's the key to the Broncos on winning their third straight game against the Chiefs. The Broncos are going to have to play great on offense. They're going to have to score a lot of points. And it's going to have to be touchdowns. But the Broncos are going to have to play great in the red zone. Now on defense, the Broncos are going to have to play some great defense and play the type of defense they played against the Titans. They are going to have to stop Tyreek Hill especially. Tyreek Hill always has a big game against the Broncos. He gets those big plays. He gets all the catches, a lot of yards and touchdowns. Tyreek Hill has been one of the reasons as to why the Broncos don't beat the Chiefs. No matter if it's here in Denver or in Kansas City, he always has a big game against the Broncos, and the Broncos have a hard time stopping Tyreek Hill. The Broncos are also going to have to stop Travis Kelce. He always has a big game against the Broncos. He has a lot of yards, a lot of catches, and touchdowns. They have to double team Travis Kelce. But the Broncos are definitely going to have to stop Patrick Mahomes from having a big game, having big plays, having a lot of yards and touchdowns, and being able to make those big plays when he needs to. They are going to have to stop Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is one of the hardest quarterbacks to stop, and he's one of the hardest quarterbacks to sack. It's very hard to stop Patrick Mahomes and sack him. And once you get to Patrick Mahomes, the football is already out of his hand. He has thrown it down the field and made a big play, or he has already scored a touchdown for the Chiefs. If the Broncos want to win this game against the Chiefs on Thursday Night Football, since it's a primetime game, they have to stop the Chiefs' offense from scoring a lot of points and touchdowns. And the Broncos are going to have to score 20 or more points if they want to have a chance at winning this game. They have to stop Tyreek Hill from having a big game. They need to double team Travis Kelce. And they're going to have to stop Patrick Mahomes. And that's definitely going to be a challenge for the Broncos. But if the Broncos want to beat the Chiefs and give the Chiefs their third straight loss, they need to look at the type of game plan and see what the other two teams that the Chiefs previously played did to stop the Chiefs from scoring a lot of points, and how those teams were able to beat the Chiefs. They need to see what the Colts did and what the Texans did, and how the Colts and the Texans were able to beat the Chiefs. If they can see what those two teams did to stop the Chiefs and to win the game against the Chiefs, the Broncos will have a chance at winning this game. And the Broncos can land up beating the Chiefs. They can give the Chiefs their third straight loss, and the Broncos can win their third straight game. Now we're going to have to wait and see who wins the Broncos-Chiefs game. But whatever team wants to win this game, they're going to have to play great on offense and on defense for the entire game. Not just for one quarter, a half a game, or for the first three quarters, or up until the last few minutes of the game. It has to be the entire game if they want to win the game. So those are the keys for the Broncos on winning the game against the Chiefs. This is a 7-week of regular season football. So right now I'm going to update you with the Week 6 final scores. I'm also going to tell you the Week 7 schedule and the games to keep an eye on this week in NFL football. So looking at the NFL schedule, to start off right now, I'm going to update you with the Week 6 final scores and the highlights from this week of NFL football. The Patriots beat the Giants 35-14 on Thursday Night Football. The Panthers beat the Buccaneers 37-26. The Redskins beat the Dolphins 17-16. The Vikings beat the Eagles 38-20. The Texans beat the Chiefs 31-24. The Seahawks beat the Browns 32-28. The 49ers beat the Rams 20-7. The Cardinals beat the Falcons 34-33. The Jets beat the Cowboys 24-22. The Broncos beat the Titans 16-0. The Steelers beat the Chargers 24-17 on Sunday Night Football, and the Packers beat the Lions 23-22 on Monday Night Football. Now looking at Week 7, here are the Week 7 matchups to keep an eye on this week in NFL football. The Chiefs versus the Broncos on Thursday Night Football. The Vikings versus the Lions. The Texans versus the Colts. The Saints versus the Bears. The Ravens versus the Seahawks. The Eagles versus the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. And the Patriots versus the Jets on Monday Night Football. So that's the Week 6 final scores and the Week 7 schedule for the NFL. The undefeated team so far this season includes the Patriots and the 49ers. Quarterbacks Russell Wilson and Kyle Allen are the last two starting quarterbacks without an interception this season. So we're going to have to wait and see how long the Patriots and the 49ers can remain undefeated this season. And we're also going to have to wait and see how long quarterbacks Russell Wilson and Kyle Allen can go without throwing an interception in the next few games for the rest of the regular season. In the Week 7 NFL Power Rankings, the current top 10 NFL football teams are the Patriots, Saints, 49ers, Seahawks, Packers, Chiefs, Texans, Bills, Ravens, and Vikings. Right now I'm going to take a commercial break. When I come back, I will talk about the NBA and NHL. Welcome back to All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to NBA basketball. Kyle Lowry and the Raptors have agreed to a one-year contract extension. Bradley Beal and the Wizards have agreed to a 2-year contract extension. Moving on now to NHL hockey. In the last few days, the Avalanche were the only team in the NHL still undefeated, but on October 16, during the Avalanche Penguins game, the Penguins landed up beating the Avalanche 3-2 in overtime, and this was the first loss of the season for the Avalanche. So now in the NHL, there are no teams undefeated now, and the Avalanche were the last team in the NHL to remain undefeated. But looking at the Avalanche, they're a young, talented team, and they definitely have a lot of potential this season and going into the future, and they have the potential of being a higher seed in the Western Conference, making their way into the Stanley Cup playoffs and advancing further in the Stanley Cup playoffs this season. We're going to have to wait and see what type of season the Avalanche have and how they play this season. This is only the beginning of the regular season for the Avalanche and for the rest of the teams in the NHL. There's no doubt that the Avalanche are a young, talented team, and they're very exciting to watch, and they're definitely going to have a lot of potential this season and going into the future. So looking at the current schedule for the Avalanche, in the last week, the Avalanche went against the Coyotes, and the Avalanche were able to beat the Coyotes 3-2. The Avalanche went against the Capitals, and the Avalanche were able to beat the Capitals 6-3. And the Avalanche went against the Penguins, but unfortunately, they lost the game in overtime 3-2. Before the Avalanche Penguins game, the Avalanche were undefeated, and they were the only team in the NHL undefeated. After the Avalanche lost to the Penguins this week, there was no team in the NHL that is undefeated anymore, and the Avalanche were the last team in the NHL to remain undefeated, and the Avalanche have received their first loss this season. In the next week, the Avalanche go against the Panthers, the Lightning, the Blues, and the Golden Knights. So that's the current schedule for the Avalanche going into next week. Right now I'm going to take a commercial break. When I come back, I will talk about college football and soccer. Welcome back to All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to college football. Last weekend, number 3 Georgia was beaten and upset in double overtime by South Carolina, and the final score was 20-17 in the second overtime. Now Georgia is ranked number 10, and there's no doubt this season, this was one of the biggest upsets in college football this season, since South Carolina isn't even ranked in the college football top 25, and they were able to take down number 3 Georgia at their stadium. Colorado lost to number 12 Oregon 30-45 on Friday, October 11. Colorado State beat New Mexico 35-21 on Friday, October 11. Colorado goes against Washington State on Saturday, October 19th. This is the 8th week of college football. So right now I'm going to update you with the Week 7 college football final scores. I'm also going to tell you the Week 8 college football schedule and the games to keep an eye on this week in college football. So looking at the college football schedule, to start off with Week 7. In Week 7, here are the final scores and highlights from this week of college football. Number 5 Oklahoma beat number 15 Texas 34-27. Number 7 Penn State beat number 23 Iowa 17-12. Number 2 LSU beat number 9 Florida 42-28. And South Carolina beat number 10 Georgia 20-17 in overtime. There's no doubt that the South Carolina-Georgia game was one of the biggest upsets in college football this season, since South Carolina isn't a ranked team in the college football top 25, and they were able to take down Georgia at their stadium, and Georgia is ranked in the college football top 25, and they're even in the top 10 of college football. So looking at Week 8, here are the matchups to keep an eye on this week in college football. Number 12 Oregon versus number 25 Washington. Number 17 Arizona State versus number 13 Utah. And number 16 Michigan versus number 7 Penn State. In the Week 8 college football AP Top 10 poll, the current top 10 college football teams are Alabama, LSU, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Penn State, Notre Dame, Florida, and Georgia. Moving on now to soccer, Cristiano Ronaldo now has 700 career goals, and he became the 6th player in history to reach 700 career goals. Cristiano Ronaldo has 700 career goals. He is a 5-time Ballon d'Or winner. He is the all-time top scorer in the UCL. He is the only player to win 5 UCL titles, and he has the most international goals by a European player, which is the second most all time. So there's no doubt that Cristiano Ronaldo is one of the best soccer players, and he is one of the best players to ever play soccer. In 2019, before the Colorado Rapids season began, Tim Howard announced he is retiring from soccer at the end of this season. Once the Colorado Rapids season ended at the beginning of October, Tim Howard announced it was his final game and he retired from soccer after the season was over. So looking at Tim Howard's career, there's no doubt that Tim Howard was one of the best soccer players, especially in international games and when he played in the U.S. men's soccer tournament, and even when he played in Major League Soccer and when he played in international games for international teams overseas. There's no doubt that Tim Howard was one of the best soccer players. So I want to say congrats to Tim Howard on having a great career in soccer and enjoy retirement. Right now I'm going to take a commercial break. When I come back, I will talk about the end of the show. Welcome back to All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to end the show. What to watch for this week in sports? The Broncos' next game is against the Chiefs in Denver on Thursday, October 17th. The 7th week of NFL regular season football. Colorado goes against Washington State on Saturday, October 19th. CU Buffaloes, CSU Rams. The 8th week of college football. The American League Championship Series between the Astros and the Yankees. Major League Baseball postseason baseball, Major League Baseball, NBA preseason basketball, NBA basketball, the Avalanche, NHL hockey. Moving on now on the next show, I will talk about NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, NHL hockey, and college football. I hope you all have a great weekend. Tune in to the next All Sports with Gerardo show next Thursday from 3:30 to 5 p.m. I want to say thank you to everybody that listens to All Sports through Met Radio here on mymetmedia.com. Subscribe or like my pages on social media at All Sports with Gerardo. Until next time, this is Gerardo.